nobody has said this directly, but I think a lot of people, teams, and a lot of investors, they would rather you hire C players and B players at the chance that knowing you would never hire an A player or a pro player as long as you never get somebody that'll fail. And I'm like, I'm not here to just like be another company, another person growing here and there. And to do that, you have to hire people that are incredibly good, which often means hiring people that haven't been in the exact industry. They're going to think differently. They're going to be super skilled at the job you're hiring them to, but I almost need you to have a diversity of thought versus other people.
This is Shed Talk. Kurt Euler, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on Shed Talk. And I got a quick question for you. The king of scaling businesses. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I did not intend to come up with that name, but I've been kind of billed that for a number of times now. I've repeatedly been brought in by companies to make them not grow 5%, 10%, 20% a year, but figure out how over a number of years, sometimes 10 years, but we can average 50 to 500% year over year growth. So I had to start 2 LLCs when I was 14 because I was going to have to pay enough payroll taxes and the government will come after you. But I quickly got into technology. One of the first big companies was a company called Navtech. Think about car navigation systems or MapQuest back in our day, or Microsoft Flight Simulators back on the shelf over my shoulder, that they actually rebuilt entirely how they designed all those games using my technology. So we took that company from 85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion over 10 years. But that was like the linchpin for 11 industries. And so while I was there, I started more than 24 internal companies. Not all of them were successful. Most of them failed. Some skyrocketed like the parent company, and I've just been on a roll since then.
How did you manage to even think about technology back in the day? How long ago was that?
I started that company in 2000, but that company had been a research and development arm of Philips Electronics. It was like an almost 20-year-old company by that point. Philips Electronics had put like $600 million into it, way ahead of the time for where they should have been. And I kind of stumbled into it. I mean, I actually turned down the retained search firm that reached out to me first about the job, and they had to call me back with an offer before I would even come out for the interview. So I kind of joke, like I was not only was I not looking, I said no to the career path that I'm on.
Oh my God. So as you're saying no, what made you to say yes to the job?
So the single thing was this gentleman, Saladin Khan, who ended up being my boss's boss, and then I worked for Saladin as well. He was the chief strategy officer of the company. And so the retained search company called me back, and I was going to go work for an investment bank. I came out of school being able to code, and I was going to be somewhere between the high-end quantitative people and the engineers, carving up billions of dollars of secure mortgage-backed securities into these different bonds and stuff. And they called me, and they were like, hey, you need to come out and interview for this company. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. And they called me back and said, look, we spoke to Saladin Khan. He said, if you come out and if at any point you don't like the job, if this makes sense, anytime you don't like it over the first 6 months, he'll pay you out for the year. And I went, well, that's worth coming out for the interview. And when I came out, he explained to me where mapping data was, spatial data and real-time traffic data was at that time in the industry. Long before even like MapQuest had really taken off. And he said, here's what I think the future is going to look like. He goes, I can't promise you that we're going to be successful, but I promise you will learn more working for me in the next 2 to 3 years than you would at Bain Capital or somewhere for the next 10 years. And I went, that sounds interesting. So that's why I said no, but why I ended up taking the opportunity was really the passion from this individual. And he was one of the most eloquent spoken people I had ever met on almost any topic you think of. Like now there's a book called Range by David Epstein that says why generalists succeed over specialists. Well, that was him. He was almost Elon Musk, where you could pick 15 different topics and he was smarter than almost everybody in those industries.
So when you're doing this and you finally got the job, you're in it. Now all of a sudden, was there a defining moment in time that you're saying, oh, wait a second, there's another opportunity here, because the money's now probably coming in like maybe $100 an hour kind of thing. I'm just joking about that dollar figure, but all of a sudden it's coming in that now opportunities starting to open up because that door just got opened up, and now all of a sudden you got to see something that you never ever got to see before, and that's probably huge revenues.
Huge revenues, but also anticipation. Most of the company's revenue, like 90% of that time, came from automotive, which is an old style business. And so I was the only person responsible for the financial model to take the company public. We were working on an IPO. And so all of our models, all of executives said, yeah, we get the lion's share of our dollars today from automotive, but it's going to come from mobile. This was years before smartphones. Mobile data wasn't a thing. And I was like, okay, that's different. And so, and the CEO that had just come in was the former CFO of Disney as a whole, president of Disney theme parks. His name was Judson Green. He ended up mentoring me later. And he was just so convinced that of all these new areas that were going to open up. So the thing about like your eyes open up, I had no idea what an entrepreneur was, even though I'd started some companies earlier. I had no idea what like starting a bunch of like real companies were like. And I walked into Judson's office one day because like that's where I was at in the company, and he had an open door policy for a lot of us. And I said, I have this idea that I've talked to a couple other people. They think it's stupid, but I'm really convinced I'm right. And looking back, like why would a 24, 25-year-old kid ever think they could walk into like the CEO, former head of all Disney theme parks with that kind of attitude? He goes, tell me what you're thinking. And I said, I have a lot of friends in the video game industry. And they spend literally like $80 to $150 million designing these games. And I think I can cut their costs by 50 to 60%. And he goes, huh. And he didn't ask me any other questions. All he said was, can you work on that while you keep your day job? And I said, yeah. He goes, okay, don't tell your boss. And here's a department code to bill everything to. Travel as you need to. And so that's when I went, there's some opportunities here, because you all think the right side of the company is going to put the left side of the company out of business, and he's still investing in crazy ideas from me.
Oh, so what was the most craziest idea that he was getting into with you?
In that case, we ended up going into Microsoft on the video game side, and so they spent at that time $80 to $100 million to build a new big version of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And we went in and said, their first call was, I think we can save you at least $40 million in your build if you'll change how you do it using us. And we ended up saving them about $25 million hard costs. We have no idea the soft costs fully for it. But that was the kind of craziest idea that grew really big anyways, was taking really automotive data. I mean, Rand McNally maps, all the print maps are printed from digital data from this company still today. And you think about how big Google Maps is. This company, now called Here Technologies, is still so much bigger than that. And yet we were like, well, let's go change how they build video games and racing games and flight games and skateboarding games based on Mars in 300 years. They still base those off of real cities today.
So when you're looking at the video games back then, to all of a sudden fast forward, if you can look back into or go forward in time to here we are today and look at the transition of video, let's just talk video game here because you're in it, from then to now, could you have imagined how much and how big it had grown? Or not dollar and figure wise, but technology wise?
I don't think at that time that anybody would have anticipated we'd be at the pure high def, HD rendering and 4K rendering that you see in so many games now, which is better than the CGI in movies back then. I invented patents that were granted about how to take our same technology and ideas from video games and do it for movies and TVs, and still it's like, so they use some of that technology in Stargate shows and things like that, where they're building backgrounds based on all this aggregate data. Video games look better than that nowadays. And so, like, I don't think anybody would have anticipated that.
Yeah.
At least I didn't.
Oh, no, for sure. Anyway, things are. Now, here you are, 24 years old, prime of your life at that point, and then all of a sudden, there's a shift. Everybody has a shift, and I'm looking at the shift because all of a sudden it says, when does the public speaking come into play? When do people actually sit down and need to listen to what you have to say? Because now you're doing talks, you're doing all that. When was that moment in time?
I started public speaking probably when I was 26 or 27, but they were industry specifics and they weren't paid gigs until later my 20s. Because of a lot of the things in video games and we were working on new technology. Literally, by the time I was 26, I think I was speaking in front of 3,000 people at like E3 and the GDC Game Developers Conference about what people could be doing with the data. It was later after we'd had repeat successes for many years, not just at Navtech, that company, but with me, some companies and things I invested in later, where people started bringing me in to talk about different things and much more about operating. Because that gentleman Saladin Khan, he was. I look back at it, he was completely right. I mean, I learned more. I stayed at that company for 10 and a half years, but I had a little handwritten note in my employment contract that said I could do anything that was not competitive with the company, which is not normal for an American company. Usually, like, this is your job. And so they hand wrote my holding company into it, my little LLC. It became an S corp. And so I started investing out of that. I started doing all sorts of other things. I started literally a side project of a blog that I ended up selling to AOL at the time, and for a nice exit. And that was a side project, and just had no idea that what I was really good at is what people build later about being the king of scaling. I, I do. Yes, I'm able to see some things that are out to good ways, but I think I'm much better at listening to other people's ideas, the milieu of things that are coming through, and then putting everything into a system about how do we operate that at scale and test things at scale. I mean, I think successful entrepreneurs, whether you're running a bar or you're building $100 million SaaS company, that it all comes down to how do I allocate resources for the best return at the lowest risk, and that's all about testing.
And which one has been your greatest challenge right now with all the companies you've been involved with? What has been your greatest challenge?
My greatest challenge right now is actually HR teams and a lot of investors. So I say that I think probably started about 5 years ago or so. I started to see this shift that some of my friends in retained search have noticed much more distinctly than I have. But where in the past, I mean, I have no problem based on my background being able to go work for most companies if there's an opportunity and we make an introduction. But the investors and the HR teams, they're so concerned about risk right now. Like when I'm hiring people, they don't want to hire. Like, I could have worked with an engineer at 3 different companies, but if I'm now in real estate, which is one of the big industries I'm in right now, and that engineer has not been in real estate for the last 2 to 5 years, HR will try to stop me from hiring that person usually, because in their mind, there's this calculation that says, hey, you have to be doing the exact job in the exact industry, or it's a pretty high chance that you're not going to work out. And they're so concerned about things not working out that they're nobody has said this directly, but I think a lot of people, teams, and a lot of investors, they would rather you hire C players and B players at the chance that knowing you would never hire an A player or a pro player as long as you never get somebody that'll fail. And I'm like, I'm not here to just like be another company, another person growing here and there. I want to grow something at scale. I either want to jump into a burning ship and let's turn the ship around and go win the industry, or let's do something that people will look back at and go, how in the hell were you all able to do that with that small of a team? And to do that, you have to hire people that are incredibly good, which often means hiring people that haven't been in the exact industry. They're going to think differently. They're going to be super skilled at the job you're hiring them to, but I almost need you to have a diversity of thought versus other people.
When you're talking about diversity thought, okay, and you're hiring these people in, and they're not the same people, like you're looking at somebody totally different in the field. Yes, they know how to do accounting or whatever they know how to do. How are you really honing in on their gifts and abilities and their skills? And how do you monetize? It's not even monetize. How do you actually recognize that in them?
I think when it comes down to you as the hiring manager, or wherever you're at, if you're hiring you're hiring peers, your job in interviewing people is to help them tell their superhero stories. Everybody has them, but like I look at myself, like I look at all the executive roles that I've gotten. I haven't interviewed for them, and so I get hired because I'm having conversations that are casual. If you actually put me in a normal interviewing like situation, I would be honest and say I interview horribly. Well, I find most people interview horribly. Well, if most people's like, I look at some of the best business development people that have ever worked for me, and I look at their resume. And this one gentleman, Paulo, sent me his resume and said, "Hey, I'd like a recommendation to this company." And I said, "I will not recommend you to that company that I could pick up the phone for until you redo your resume," because I knew what he was capable of, and the resume was horrible. And this was one of the best BD people I've ever had. And I go, okay, if I don't interview well, if most people don't interview well, then my job as a hiring manager or somebody that's interviewing peers, my job is to help you interview well. So it's to suck out of you what have been the problems that you've been in, what drives you from a passion perspective, what are you really good at. Like, I don't have a passion for any industry or technology. I have a passion for people. You could put me in waste management and I would be freaking fanatical with it because I'd enjoy working with the people on my team. Well, that's an important thing to draw out of somebody and then go, okay, now I know that's what drives you. Is this role going to give you that? Okay, and then find those superhero stories and then test it. And then a lot of times, and then I'll have to coax the next stage of person that's going to be interviewing the person, say, here's what I saw. You're going to see these negatives, or they're going to show up this way. I need you to go test and see if what I uncovered from them is real. And then put them through the ringer kind of for the first 30 to 60 days. I mean, it's a test on both sides.
And have you ever been really surprised with some people? All of a sudden they're coming in and they become their superhero story is all of a sudden they're actually ready, guys. We're going to actually go and invest in you and actually create another business around you because you've seemed to be tapping into everybody's gifts. And because of all the business and the finance and everything that you've been doing, telling them, okay, wait a second, you're an employee here. Did you know that you can actually, by the way, open another door and another leverage? Have you ever seen that come into play with you? Because you've obviously had it happen to yourself.
Only at really big companies where we've been able to have that kind of entrepreneurial innovation kind of group as well, where it's like work on your day job and carve out 10% of your time or show up in the evenings and the weekends and work on something else. It does show very similar, but it does show up in, when I'm hiring somebody, I have to believe that they're going to be really good at the job I'm hiring them for. But as mentioned, I'm only going to join companies that are either a burning ship and we're turning the ship, or there's such a huge growth opportunity, it's going to be like a startup. And so if I'm hiring you as a front-end software engineer to do this role, well, that's the role you have to do. But there's so many other jobs to be done. And I think everybody needs to talk in those terms. Here's jobs to be done in the company, whether it's a restaurant, a nightclub, or software company. You go, here's something that needs to be done, but that I and nobody else had time to do it. And you look for people that are going to raise their hand and go, can I try that? Or I have an idea. And that they may not necessarily you may not start a new business around them, but that's how people get promoted, is that they take on responsibility that they weren't hired for and they just freaking kill it.
And then, they're just making themselves look even better and better and being vocal. Who's ever the most vocal is going to get the best position and move forward. Don't be sitting back and listening and let somebody else take control. So quick question for you here, mentorship, because you had mentioned that you have a mentor in your life. When you're 26 years old with Disney, how was that? And what was he doing for as a mentorship? Like, how did he mentor you?
Well, I've had mentors at different times. So earlier in my career, and so kind of my early 30s, I had a gentleman named Don who did not work in my company. And I didn't actually know that he was mentoring me. I had asked him to be on a board for me for a video game industry association that I was running. And he lived in Chicago with me and started buying me lunches and dinners periodically. And after about 9 months, I asked him, I was like, I was getting so much value from talking with him. And he was, 2 seasons ahead of me, 3 seasons ahead of me in my career. And I asked Don if he would be my mentor. And he was like, what the hell do you think we've been doing? And so, but that worked very well. And so I think that conversation should happen earlier. But so he coaxed me in alternative revenue streams personally. So I had connections with a lot of different industries, and he had a venture-backed group at that point helping fund him for a large offshoring group doing software engineering. And I was just doing introductions for him, and he was like, all right, who do I write the checks to? And I'm like, I'm making introductions because I know you all do good work, not because I'm expecting something. He goes, yes, but this is something we pay for. So I'm going to teach you how to make money where it's good money. And so he taught me a lot of wealth in that way about, only introduce people where, your name's on the line, but if you're going to pay somebody else for it, and somebody introduces you, you should be writing them a check too, if they're a friend or a close partner as well. And I've kind of followed that throughout most of my career. But I've always had mentors. It's rare that I will go more than 6 months without a business mentor or a personal mentor. Sometimes I'll focus on one or the other. It wasn't until I left that company, Navtech, that and actually maybe right before I left, as part of helping me decide to leave, that I actually start having a formal mentoring relationship with Judson Green, the gentleman that I mentioned who had been our former CEO. I mean, he did mentoring as you do as an executive level to people lower in the organization, but it wasn't a formal relationship. It was much more of serving him actually in a lot of ways as well. And then he would just open doors. But afterwards, like, he coaxed me to take my next job. He coaxed me to get out of my next job. He coaxed me through what those conversations should look like. And so, and then after he passed on, the CEO of that company I joined later, we sold it to Oracle, became a mentor of mine.
So when you're looking at mentors, okay, and I'm going to go because I get a lot of people that ask this question, okay, about mentors, paid mentors versus true mentors. What do you find the difference between the two? So you'll have people that'll buy a mentor. And there's mentors out there saying, here's my life coach and here's where it is. And from and it could be from your experience or what you see other people do, that it's kind of like, what is it? If you can't do, you teach kind of thing. You've heard that statement before. So, because mentors becomes a big topic around people about what are mentors and like, what do they really do, or which are the best ones? So.
Yeah, for me, it is a terminology thing. For me, mentor is a unpaid position. And it's somebody that they're not going to get anything benefit-wise. I mean, they may get a dopamine hit out of it. They may be part of their legacy building, but they're not getting anything financial out of it. And mentors are unpaid relationships in any way. If it's on the paid side, I'm going to call that a coach or an advisor. Like, I might be an advisor to CEO. I might join a board of advisors, and maybe they give me equity for that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just defining the relationship a little bit differently for me. For me, in both cases, I'm going to qualify people for myself and even where I should step in on a couple different things. One is they have to be several seasons ahead in the topic or areas that I'm asking for help on. Or if they're asking me where I'm at, and they have to have been successful in there. To your point, like, those that can't teach, like, sorry, you should not be coaching or teaching people at that point. It doesn't have to be the exact thing, but they have to have run successful businesses before I will take business advice for them. And I want them to be open and transparent. And so, like I mentioned, this company we sold to Oracle, the company was named Vitcher, and the gentleman's name was Reggie Bradford. When Reggie brought me in, he brought me in as kind of his right-hand person. And as part of our unique relationship while I was working for him anyways, was he allowed me in. I sat in his office on most days. I got to hear discussions and fights with his wife about working late. I got to see negotiations about him bringing the kids in the office. I would work from his house sometimes. He would bring me into investor meetings that I frankly shouldn't have been in. Like, only the CEO of a company that's raised $32 million should be in. But he gave me the transparency. So as part of what he was trying to do was develop himself, but sooner, he goes, you need to know what I'm bad at in my personal life and bad at in work, so that you know where and when to take advice and when not to follow, like, choices that I've made. I was an employee. So he was actually treating me almost as a mentoring relationship, because I got paid for being the job, but this insight that he gave me into what was going on, and then we would travel and we'd have these conversations, that was much more mentoring. But that's what I like to see from a mentor's relationship is, hey, look, here's where I'm at, and here's what I've done that's failed me in the past. It's like, if somebody's been divorced 4 times, should I be taking relationship advice about what to do from them? Maybe not, but they probably have a lot of advice about what doesn't work. Like, I have a failed marriage, so I can tell you for sure what doesn't work or what didn't work for me in certain ways. And I think that's some of what I look for is, like, you want advice from somebody, whether a mentor, a coach, or advisor. Like, are they going to give you advice in that one area, but also open up to other things that are going on?
So when you're looking at, we talk about the mentorship, and he's giving you advice. This is what not to do. And you just talked about the divorce, and here's a guy telling you everything. When was it the point that all of a sudden, you know what, he told me this, but I did it anyway? Have you found that people do a lot of that? You can mentor all you want. You tell them the story. Here's what you don't do, and then you end up that you have to do it.
Yeah. So after I left working for him, we actually, he got me this incredible job at Oracle, which I turned down. He was mad. Like he didn't talk to me for like 6 to 12 months. Um, I'd started a SaaS-based company, raised venture capital at the time, and was doing quite well. We were breaking even, and I went back to him. So now we're about 2.5, maybe 3 years after I worked for him, and I said, Reggie, work is just incredibly hard. And I was married at this point, and to my wife now, and we've been married a couple of years. And I'm like, and home is really difficult. Like she hasn't left me, but like it wouldn't surprise me. And I was like, this job is just killing me. And I'm like, why? And he goes, well, you shouldn't have started a company. And so that's where kind of the king of scaling actually started very formally. It was Reggie started sharing it a lot. And I said, what do you mean I shouldn't have started this company? He goes, you did it. You got to $1 million in sales, no problem, right? I said, yep. And he goes, it took everything you had. And I said, yep. He goes, I hired you because you could add 1 to 2 zeros to a company's net revenue. That's not starting from zero. That's taking something that's already there and growing. This was stupid. You need to figure out how to get out of that company as quickly as possible. Now I'm a CEO and a founder with only another founder at that point and like 15 employees. And I've taken venture money and I'm like, what do you mean I have to get out of it? And so what I didn't know at that point to your thing was I was doing things that he had failed earlier in his life, recovered his marriage, that I had failed at earlier in my first marriage. And only after I got out of that company did I kind of realize after about 6 months, because I came home from my wife and said, I've negotiated my way out of operating day to day. I'm just going to take the next 6 to 12 months and just spend time with you. You don't only know me as a founder. And she just erupted in tears because like we didn't spend time together. And I was like, oh my gosh, Reggie was entirely right. I was making the same mistakes that I would have looked at and went, you need to go home and have dinner with your family. And that he had already turned his ship a good bit. And I had been making those mistakes myself and just hadn't seen it. But I had gone through a couple of years there where I didn't have a mentor or anybody speaking into me.
So when you look at that and diving a little bit deeper into that thing is about, and people ask the question about work-life balance. Is there such a thing as work-life balance?
Only in terms of balance being a verb. I mean, balance is not a state of Zen to me. I think there's always times in your company or personal life where you're going to have to go extreme in other situations. I mean, I don't care if you're already in debt. If your spouse comes out with cancer and has 6 months to live, you're going to let the job go to the side a good bit to spend more time and figure that out. And so I think there's work-life balance in terms of it being a verb. The most successful thing for me is acknowledging I usually don't see it myself. While my wife sees it, while my wife sees both my home balance, but also my work balance, because she gets to see in my calendar, she gets insights into everything. She helps manage some of my public speaking. Um, while she sees it, not only is she not comfortable in speaking back to me if I'm out of balance in an area, it wouldn't be good for our relationship for me to give her that authority to kind of do. So mentors can do that, but really, I at this point I've got a group of guys around me that we've been in this small group for probably about 7 years at this point. Um, I'd say we're friendly, but we're not friends. Like we do a trip every once in a while together, but they care more about me and what I want out of my life and my health, my wealth, my spirituality, and, all of those areas that they would tell me what I need to hear if it jeopardized our relationship. And that's so hard to get, but like that's more important for keeping the balance verb to me than it is having a mentor.
And then when you just mentioned about having this group of forum a group like EO, YPO Tech, and all these business organizations that have, it's not there to sell to, they're there to mentor and to grow as an individual spiritually, holistically, whatever that is to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you found that great power and availability for you. Is that correct? With a group like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a couple different groups. One similar to like an EO or YPO. This group came out of a church and a para ministry group where a gentleman literally just wanted to not have people make as many mistakes as he made in his life. So
Interesting. We were talking right before we got on air and everything, and I was asking you the question. I said about your first talk, and I wanted to get in about the first talk because it was interesting because you had a bunch of slides on there. And it's kind of like looking at the past. So I wanted to look at the past, the present, and the future, because people would say, hey, I can tell the future, I can tell the past. And it was interesting because when I got to look at your website, and I recommend everybody check your website out, and to look at your first talk that you did on there. And it was interesting because it was about Amazon, okay? Where Amazon was coming, where they're going, where they're profitable and going through. And then I look back for today, and that was in 2013. And I look at it, and what was really interesting was you had on your slide the revenues, $80 billion. And they were on the hockey stick swing. And then we fast forward to today, what was it, 514 billion? And
Something like that, yeah.
something like that. And that's where I wanted to ask you a little bit about is from your first presentation that you did, and I hopefully you can remember a little bit about it, and how much different it would be today that you got to see the future. Like what you talked about before is the people you worked with at the beginning at 17 years old, how they saw the future in gaming, how they saw the future in that, versus all of a sudden everything plays the exact same way. Here you are, you did that and saw the future in your
Yeah,
actual presentation.
yeah, I've taken that presentation. I wrote a guide. If somebody searches for my name, Kurt Euler Hypergrowth, it'll pop up. It's on my website. It's free. Continuing that because it is a repeatable process, but you're not always guaranteed to be able to you can't predict the future. All you can do is de-risk things. And so like one of the things unique about Amazon that other companies have done, but it all depends on the executives, but especially the investors that are behind you. And so like what Amazon, like to your point, like while they were earning 80 billion at that time and they were into their hockey stick, they also the chart came back a really long way where they were either losing money or just barely breaking even on a net income basis. And they were raising money and continuing to invest in. Well, because at Amazon, they were able to continue to show here's where we're investing in for where dollars are going to come from in the future, net revenue dollars in the future. And so they didn't have investors behind them that were doing the typical, hey, you put in angel investment money, people are expecting to get their money out, in a 5 to 7 year time period. If it comes in with venture money, it might be a 3 to 5 year period, depending on the horizon. If it's private equity, usually they're wanting a 3 to 5 year flip before the next kind of stage private equity group would take it over. Well, nobody realizes that as a CEO when they're raising money that says the moment I raise money, I now have a boss and a boss that wants their check back. Well, that's that can be very limiting if you're seeing the future that's out 15 years. And so for me, any company you and I ever come into, I'm going to hate everything about the product or service today, especially if it's brick and mortar, or the software today, because in my mind, I'm really good at operating today, but in my mind, it's always, this is what it will look like in 10 years. This is what it will look like in 15 years. Because I'm just horribly unhappy with what we have today. I just know that's the only thing I have to sell. I can't sell the future. So I have to make money today. I have to make profit today. Well, that's a different type of investor. And when you start find investors that say, we have a rate of return and we want our money back as well, because otherwise it's philanthropy. Well, now you get to start talking about what the future really looks like. Because when somebody wants their money back with a rate of return in 3 to 5 years, even though they may be using the term they're talking about the future, that's not the future. Like 3 years, 5 years for a company, that's like tomorrow. And so all you're really doing is managing at that point. If instead, like you're giving me $10 million and we're going to go start talking about the future, we're talking about how do we get back to a safe place for the company investment. But I don't want you to get your money back for 10 years or 12 years because that's the future. And then, okay, now I want to know what that looks like to you.
What are one of the things you're doing right now? What's one of your passion projects that you're working on right now? I wouldn't even say it's passion. One of your businesses that you're doing right now.
My passion project, passion company is EZ Home Search. E is in the letter Z is in zebra, homesearch.com. It's a competitor to, in some ways, to Trulia or Redfin or anybody that comes up in the searches for Google. But it's my passion because no consumer in the U.S. or Canada realizes what happens when they fill out one of the Real pages or something. They fill out their contact form when they're searching for a home. None of us would ever take our Fidelity account and go fill out some form on a website that says, I'm going to move my $2 million IRA to a different brokerage in the next 6 months. Please sell my information. But But that's what happens when you fill it out on most of these big national portals. And so instead, this good gentleman, Preston, had built a site that said, I care much more about people's confidentiality and handle single vetted partners and you knowing everything that happens with your data because it's your data. And starting a relationship that way. And so I care about empowering people. And so that's kind of my passion project right now.
And how's that business right now with Easy? How's it going? Like, how are you
Easy
doing?
Home Search is going really well. Preston had it. He's been a very successful real estate broker in the Carolinas for years, decades, I think. And he had this as like a regional site for one of his brokerages for a while. But he decided to start making it a big national player, we've been hiring lots of people. I just posted for another job today for another software engineer, and we've broken even in just 4 months. So.
Oh, that is awesome. You know what, Kurt? Listen, thank you very much for your time and everything that you've done coming on board with Shed Talk. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kurt. Thank you. Now you know. Shed Talk.